Welcome to Lock It Down Sports. I'm your host, Locke Hoover. Thank you for joining me today. We've got a lot to get into. I'm really excited to speak with you today. And before I get into the Falcons and the Bills and the college football and a little bit of baseball, first I want you to talk about my friends over at Stream Studio. They're a multi-camera live streaming platform that allows you to go live in less than 1 minute. That's right, less than 1 minute, and anything you want, whether it's video podcasting, webinar, streaming platform, allows you to go stream to multi-platforms all at the same time. So go check out my friends over at Stream Studio. Now, like I said, the Falcons, boy, did they look sharp against the 49ers. Not supposed to win that game at all. But what the Falcons do, they grounded and pounded and said, know what? 49ers, we're going to run it straight down your throat. That's exactly what they did, churning out yards and just powering the football. I saw a stat, and I looked it up. Marcus Mariota only threw the ball 13 times. 13 times. That's a recipe for success for the Falcons offense when your quarterback, Marcus Mariota, only throws it 13 times. I know it's kind of funny, right? But it makes me wonder why they don't go get Desmond Ridder out on that field more. Yes, they're 3-3. Sounds funny, I know. The Falcons are in conversation for a playoff spot early on. Yes, it's early, 6 games in. We're third way through the season, though. So, there's some real conversations of the Falcons might be a playoff contending team, especially with the expanded wild cards now. So, it's tough, but when are we going to see if Desmond Ridder is really the dude? Wait to be seen, and so it's fun. Falcons winning a game they shouldn't have, probably, theoretically, but the Falcons could very easily be 4-2. You look at either the LA game or the Bucks game, which I didn't even get into last week, with the Tom Brady getting slammed, shall I say, and getting that foul from Grady Jarrett. Ridiculous call. Nowhere near roughing the passer. Could have completely changed the outcome of that game and the results. So the Falcons got an interesting little scenario going on, and we'll see what happens as the season progresses. Another fun game. Bills Chiefs. Probably not going to be the last time we see them play, but just the fun of two top-notch quarterbacks in Mahomes and Allen going back and forth is something to see, and it was just a fun, entertaining game. It wasn't interesting enough. It wasn't the highest scoring game on CBS this weekend, and we'll get into that a little bit later on. And then also too, Ole Miss. We'll get into more college football, but Ole Miss still undefeated out in the West, and they might have something to say when it comes time to when the rubber meets the road. They're still got to go get through Alabama and face Alabama, but they're in conversation now for something we'll get into later. This playoff picture now is 6 games in, starting to form now, and where we can have some fun conversations and kind of see where everybody's at in the early going. Now, speaking of the early going, and a game I want to dive into, it's Tennessee, Alabama. Whew! Holy smokes, what a game. What a shootout. What a back and forth game. That atmosphere, you could just tell in Knoxville, was loud, and they brought it. They rattled every bit of Alabama in that game with how they played. And even Nick Saban in the press conference, you could tell Neyland Stadium kind of shook Alabama a little bit because the players, usually you get all pumped and start singing and dancing, and they didn't do that in Knoxville during the game before pregame. They didn't do that. That right there is a telling sign of whoa, this is 100 plus thousand loud screaming and getting after it, and that's exactly what Tennessee did on their first drive. First defensive stand, and then Tennessee pays it off with that defensive stand and scores a touchdown. That right there set the tone to me for that offense. And especially from the fans' perspective, of course, the players knew they could do it, but just from the fans' perspective of, okay, all week we get this hype of our offense is really good. Our offense is good. But we haven't played a caliber team that is the University of Alabama yet. Are we real? It's like I want to think we are, but let's see it against a Nick Saban defense in Alabama. Go straight down after that first defensive stand, which turned out to be huge. It sounds strange and weird that a first defensive stand, one defensive stand, turned out to be a big deal. Obviously, it was, but it set the tone for that for the offense to do what they did all game. And then same thing, second offensive drive, two touchdowns. Tennessee's up 14-0, and you're like, huh, all right, this is interesting. This could be a track meet. And boy, oh boy, was it a track meet. And I said last week, can Tennessee's defense be good enough? Boy, they were just good enough, right? I mean, Alabama only punted 3 times in the game and had a missed field goal. I mean, obviously, their 49 points, they put up points too. Wasn't enough, obviously, the 52 that Tennessee scored, but it's just a good enough. And Tennessee's never going to blow away their numbers. They're in the lower half in the SEC, in all of college football, in defensive rankings and numbers. Yeah, I mean, some of that is because their guys are on the field a lot of the time. Because what's time of possession? It doesn't matter. Tennessee doesn't care about time of possession. They want to score quick. That's just how their pace of their offense is. So therefore, you're going to be on the field more because your offense scores so quickly. It just comes with the territory, and that, I mean, you saw that very much so in the game on Saturday. Also, coming to the defense, and I love this for Tennessee, they put pressure on Bryce Young. And to me, you absolutely had to, because he'll pick you apart if you don't. Perfect example, I go back to last year, the Auburn Alabama game, when Alabama's last drive on about the 5-10 yard line. They drove all the way down the field, scored a touchdown. Auburn was sitting back, rushing 3 or 4. No, you have to bring pressure. Tennessee only got 1 sack on the night, and they had 4 tackles for loss. So for negative yardage, they are behind the line of scrimmage. But they were after him, making him move, scramble left, right, uncomfortable in the pocket. And they were hitting him too, hitting him even if they didn't sack him. And that matters, because you want to, I'm getting hit all night, I'm scrambling, I've got to pull up and run a little bit sooner than I would have liked to. Makes you overthrow that ball, or crap, now I got to throw it out of bounds. So things like that are huge, and it matters. And then another thing Tennessee did in that first quarter was the field position. They had great field position all night long in that first quarter, and they paid off with touchdowns. You have to do that. You have to capitalize on your current situation where you're at. No doubt about it. You have to do it. And they did. And Tennessee, when we're talking about capitalizing, Tennessee capitalized on that touchdown that out from the turnover from Alabama when they muffed that punt. Boy, you could see old St. Nick, none too happy with that at all. But also, I think another big thing about that, outside of the score, obviously, it gave that defense a little bit more breathing room because it was a quick 3-and-out. Tennessee had to punt, and then the offense was right back on the field because of the muff punt. So it gave the defense a little bit of a breather. And anytime you can do that with the Tennessee defense, you have to. Now, I want to say typically this is Bama was very un-Bama like, especially in the first half. They had a lot of penalties in that first half, and even during the game, over on the game, they had 17 penalties for 130 yards. Typically, you're like, boy, that's very un-Bama like, but they've been the most penalized team in the country. In the country. When's the last time you heard instead that an Alabama coach Nick Saban team, the most penalized team in the country? And then also, too, that special teams turnover. Just the lack of discipline, unfocused, not focused, as Nick Saban would say. Yeah, that's exactly what happened in that first half. And the scary thing about that whole thing was Tennessee played about as clean as a game as possible in that first half. They were only up 8. Only up 8. That's what happens sometimes when you get in a track meet. When you get in track meet, that can be what happened. And then so we moved to the third quarter, or right before the end of the third quarter. Man, talk about a defensive stand. The big defensive stand there by Tennessee at the end of the third quarter. I mean, they had to have that to match that touchdown. They had to have that. There's no doubt about it, based on how the game was going and how it took place, score for score, punch for punch, blow for blow. No doubt about it. The only thing I didn't really, I didn't like about Tennessee, obviously worked out, but towards the end of the game, that Alabama's last drive, when they're driving down the field, the way you knew they were going to score or get in field goal range, why I wanted Tennessee to use some timeouts. They had timeouts to use to have more time on their end to score. And I'm sitting there screaming, timeout, timeout, timeout. And it didn't happen. And I was a little frustrated because I didn't think we were going to have enough time to get down and score. I mean, obviously it worked out, but it was that was the one thing I was kind of scratching my head about. So it was a huge, obviously a huge game, and it's Tennessee is now entered the playoff picture, and we'll get into that a little bit later. And another thing I was really impressed with outside of Tennessee's offense was how clean the pocket was. Hooker only was sacked one time. The offense had 2 tackles for loss, but one time, and but he wasn't pressed, he wasn't forced, he wasn't scrambling around near as much as Bryce Young. And that is a great thing for Tennessee offense to have. It's very refreshing, and that offensive line can pretty much do what they did, and they stepped up in a very impressive way. Now, I'm just going to give you some of these. These are some just like crazy numbers. I don't know if you've seen or heard these yet, but here are just some numbers as a whole about that game. So Tennessee, 5 possessions as a whole, Tennessee did not score on. So they had 1 punt, 2 turnovers, and 2 turnovers on down. So the 52 points scored were the most against Alabama in over 100 years. Wait for it, Swanee. That's right, Swanee scored 54 on them in 1906. So it's also the most points Alabama has scored in a loss. Alabama is now 132-1 when scoring 49 points. And then Jalen Hyatt is the only player to have 5 receiving touchdowns against a Nick Saban coach team. And then he was a single game record touchdown, single game record for touchdown caught by Tennessee in player history. And then the total amount of points scored is also a new record, and 101 points, a new record in the football game as a whole. Like I said, wild, crazy, crazy game. Before I get into a little bit more college football, let me tell you about my friends from Stream Studio. They're a multi camera live streaming platform that allows you to stream in less than a minute. You can do whatever you want with them, whether it's podcasting, webinars, platforms. Great product. Check them out. Stream Studios. Give them a look. Give them a check out. Really neat platform. Now, I want to get into a little bit more college football in about the Penn State, Michigan, and Michigan looked really impressive against a pretty solid Penn State team. So Penn State had played one of their big non-conference games in Auburn, who obviously we've seen how dreadful Auburn has been this year, but they haven't played all the cupcakes yet in their non-conference schedule. So they played a Power Five team early on. Penn State looked sharp in that game. They did. They looked good. And then Michigan, obviously coming in undefeated. These are two top 10 teams. Michigan has entered the college football playoff conversation. But boy, can they run the football. They ran for 418 yards, two guys over 150 yards. Impressive performance by Michigan. What they did, how they handled their business. They had to. Have to handle their business. Yeah, of course. They've got to, as we move into this playoff picture here, they've entered the playoff picture conversation. Tennessee has, Michigan, of course, along with your regular suspects. Georgia's going to be there, Clemson's going to be there, Ohio State, Alabama's still in the picture because they're Alabama. Like I mentioned, Ole Miss. Ole Miss is in the conversation now, and still is. Southern Cal, and then maybe Oregon. Yeah, you've got a USC Oregon battle, 2 one-loss teams. Maybe one comes out of there. Outside looking in, you've got an Oklahoma State team in the conversation right now, and so yes, stuff going to take care of itself. Of course, there's a lot still coming up. Michigan, Ohio State, obviously going to play each other. That's going to more than likely knock one of those teams out. You've got a Tennessee Georgia matchup that may or may not knock one of the teams out. We'll get into that a little bit later. And then you've got Alabama, Ole Miss, who are squaring off. Bama loses, they're probably done. That would be their second loss. I don't see them getting in, even with the crimson on their jerseys and the Nick Saban on the sideline and the star-studded Alabama team that ESPN wants to pull from. That you also don't see that. Ole Miss then has a serious conversation and is in the ball game. Now, I was mentioning this earlier. When it comes to this Tennessee game with Georgia, to me, Tennessee beating Alabama was almost more important than the Georgia game. Yes, the most upcoming important game is the next one. Tennessee's schedule was very fortunate in how they fell in their break, where they had Alabama, UT Martin, Kentucky. If they don't take care of Kentucky, it doesn't matter. This season's done. Realistically, big picture, it's done. You take care of Kentucky, you go in undefeated against Georgia. And I would suspect Georgia to be undefeated going to that game as well. They had to get by Florida in the cocktail party. I know it's a rivalry game and all that. Been to a few of them. They're fun. They're cool games. But Georgia is a lot better team than Florida. So, with them coming in, it's a here's an interesting conversation here. And here's how I view this and how it looks for me on the outside. So, if Tennessee loses to Georgia, they probably aren't going to the SEC championship game, and they won't have to face Bama again. Sam Bama runs the table throughout. They would have one loss. Alabama would have one loss. Tennessee's chances of getting in the playoff, I would say, might be pretty good. Now, if Georgia wins, like I said, Tennessee would only have one loss. Bama would have two. Interesting conversation. So, if we, Tennessee, were to beat Georgia, but lose to Bama in the SEC championship game, I think we get in. I do. Because, yes, we'd have one loss. Georgia would have one loss. Alabama would have one loss. I think we're getting in. And then I don't see them leaving out a one loss SEC champ Alabama. I don't. Not at all. So I would think if things shake out, Tennessee and Bama would be the two getting in. Now, if Bama if Bama beats Tennessee, if Bama beats Georgia in the SEC championship game, then I think those two would likely go. If Bama runs the table in the SEC championship game, if Georgia's undefeated and loses to Alabama, I see those two teams going. Because they're not going to leave out last year's national champion and Alabama. That's just not happening at all. That's how I think it'll shake out if it comes to a one-loss team getting in. I don't see a one-loss Pac-12. Surely not a one-loss Big Ten. If Clemson has a one loss, they're not getting in. I don't think Clemson's got to run the table, and they very easily can with their schedule. They're a solid, good football team, and they have a lighter schedule. They run the table, they're in. It doesn't matter what seed they're happy. Just get them in, and that's where they're at. So it'll be something to watch, and this is you can actually have these serious conversations now of scenarios and likelihoods of how things are going to shake out. It, like I said, still a lot of football left, but we're entering the conversation of scenarios that might happen and roadmaps that can be plotted out. So, like I said, it'll be fun and it's going to be something to watch. Now, I hadn't touched on this, I hadn't gotten into this yet, and it was kind of almost a sneaky under the radar move based on when they announced it. And the announcement was when Spencer Strider, the Braves starting pitcher, signed a contract right before the start of the postseason. You're like, oh, whoa, where'd this come from? And Braves, it's a risky move for the Braves and for Strider. It's risky on both fronts. So the deal ultimately could be worth up to $92 million. They basically bought out 2 years of his free agency, which that's generally your goal of what you want to do if you lock out a young player, you buy out a year or two of his free agency to extend the contract. That's the point of locking him up. One of the main reasons, and to have some cost certainty of how much they're going to be paying these guys so you don't have to go through arbitration with them. So essentially, you're going to be paying him more upfront and possibly less in the back end of the contract. So it could be a win-win situation all the way around. I mean, but like I said, risky. For example, and why is it risky for the Braves? Just perfect example. Running their own team. Look over at Mike Soroka. 2 lights out years. Then back to back, doesn't even tears his Achilles in back to back seasons. Now he's fighting to get back in shape, his arm, health, all that. Is he going to be the same? He's stepped. He hadn't played baseball in basically 2 years. He's had a few rehab starts this year in AAA, but he wasn't sharp. So very much big risk. Also, like I said, the injury risk is real. How hard he throws. He's a smaller guy. He's not a big 6'5" throwing downhill 100 miles an hour. He's a shorter, smaller guy. And to me, the biggest comparison, I would have to say, look no further than former Met, goes by the Dark Knight, Matt Harvey. Boy, was he lights out for where he first came up through 50 something innings, and then his 2 full seasons, lights out. But then injuries, and he struggled and the wheels fell off. So his last 3 seasons, which is when Strider would be getting the big money, 20 plus million each of his three last end of his contract. Example, Matt Harvey, 92 and a third, 2/3 innings, ERA 4.86. 2017, 92 and 2/3 innings, a 6.70 ERA. 2018, 27 innings with a 7 ERA before being traded to Cincinnati, where he finished with a 4.5 ERA. See, just an example of how quick things can fall off, how things can unravel, and that's the risk right there. Absolutely, that is the risk of locking someone up like that as hard as he throws. Uh, Look at stat example, the postseason. Yes, Strider didn't have, yeah, he was coming back from injury and he didn't have his stamina, but that pitch that Brahm hit a homer on, it was the slowest fastball they've ever seen from him at 93. They looked up at the scoreboard or the scoreboard that saw 93. Everyone in the dugout just looked at each other saying, "We're about to eat," and they did when they exploded for those runs. What if he loses some of his 98 to 100 velocity during those back years? Can he figure out how to pitch, how to locate? Because he doesn't have to locate as much now when he throws 99 to 101 upper to middle half. You don't have to be as accurate. You can throw middle at 100 and people are going to miss. You can't throw middle at 93, 94. You get hammered. And that's what happened. Is he if he does lose velocity, is he going to be able to adjust? That's another thing. Some pitchers can't. And they nosedive because they've gotten away on stuff and haven't necessarily been able to learn how to pitch. There's a difference of just throwing and pitching. You hear John Smoltz and all these guys talk about it all the time of I had to learn how to pitch, not just throw. It's a big difference, and it's something to see. Just an example on Matt Harvey as well. He made in his career 28 million in a little more than 7 years in the big leagues. Yeah, he's going to be fine. He wasn't even in baseball last year, so in a tick over 7 years, 28 million. I take it, but it's not the 92 million that Strider's going to have. Say he just briefly finishes through his contract. guaranteed because the last two are option years. But if he keeps his rolling, that's what he's going to do. So there's big risk, and it's risky. It really is. On I say more on the Braves than Strider's. Something to watch how his contract plays out through the years. And I hope he continues to be dominant as a Braves man. That'd be great to see. So I guess that's something to watch, something to follow, and we'll see what happens. I promise you, next time we're going to get into Major League Baseball playoffs. We are, as the division series are wrapping up. I'm got on the TV right here. It's Yankees are leading 5-1 in the bottom of the eighth, so they're probably going to close out the Guardians, and then you've got Yankees Astros. You've already got Philadelphia and San Diego, which could be an interesting series. I know in the regular season, Philly dominated San Diego, but obviously we've seen in the regular season, you throw those numbers out. And also, I saw this stat too. Philly dominated them, but that was before Juan Soto was San Diego. So different series. They've had plenty of time to rest, set up their rotations how they want. That'll start tomorrow on Wednesday, and then the following series will start. Excuse me, yeah, and then the Astros and it's looking like it's probably going to be the Yankees will start the following day. So, excuse me, they starts Wednesday. The other game starts today. Boy, Tuesday. Anyway, like I said, we'll get into it. Some of the playoffs next week. So yeah, that'll be fun to watch. As always, you can follow me at Lock It Up Media. That's follow me on Twitter at Lock It Up Media. You've been listening to Lock It Down Sports, Locke Hoover. Have a good night.